Okay, so we're joined here by Karl Strom. Karl, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being a part of the first 100 episodes and for being here for episode 100. You and I talked on the podcast a while ago, it feels like. But anyway, wanted to bring you on and kind of get a sense from you of what's on your radar. Big tip of the hat to you and a shout out for the move. I know that you were the editor in chief over at the Hearing Review for a long time, and you've just recently made the switch over to Hearing Tracker, which kind of I think frames what we can talk about today, which is kind of like the shifting focus of just from looking at it from an industry perspective, and now with OTC and everything that's happening, kind of framing it more of what's going on with the consumer too. So I feel like this is all kind of timed nicely, but wanted to get your thoughts about what's on your mind right now.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for having me. I always enjoy this podcast, and I've gained a lot from it. Um, it has been a arduous journey from Hearing Review. I was there for 28 years, and very much enjoyed it. And my life's work is on there, and we parted amicably, and it's all good. I really like the idea of having a challenge where, I'm in Hearing Tracker is a consumer resource for people who are looking for hearing solutions, and we've got some really cool things going on there. We've got Steve Tadai doing. He's an audiologist who has set up who's also an audio engineer who set up a lab that's going to be testing and is testing hearing aids and hearables and things like that. And we've got Matthew Alsop, who's a clinician in London, an audiologist in London, and he's doing videos for us and reviewing things from an audiology side. Of course, Abram Bailey, who is the CEO and founder of Hearing Tracker, who has been very closely following pretty much everything in this arena. So it's a great crew, and it's been a really fun getting on the consumer side. And there's just as you know, there's so much going on. We're recording this on August 12th, and so the OTC hearing aid regulations haven't hit yet, but we're both Dave and I were talking beforehand, and we agree that it's real imminent within days that we would expect it. The OMB released it on Wednesday, I think. So it's back into the FDA's court. But watching all of these things from more of a consumer side, it's I think it's even more exciting, and I think the industry's excited about it in a sense, in that it should really provide a great bridge for consumers to get quality, hopefully to get quality hearing care if the FDA gets the regulations right. And I'm hoping they do it. And I think the proposed regulations are most likely going to be mostly intact, and particularly in terms of, even though there's fights about the output limits and some of these things, I think the big questions for me are going to be surrounding things like returns for credit, what they're going to do about that, and then the state, the individual state laws and how that affects licensure, and some of those things. It'll be really interesting to see how it all plays out. But I think it'll be all very positive if the good hearables and the good options for amplification end up prevailing. I think it's going to be a terrific thing for consumers.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I think that it's it's funny because it's like when I joined this industry, more or less the PCAST thing, from Obama had just come out. And so it's like for the entire time that I've been working in this industry full time, this has been sort of happening in the background. And here we are, quite literally, probably days away from all of this time and all of the paperwork and the legality and figuring out what these FDA guidelines would ultimately look like. OTC's here, right? And so I think that, there's been a lot of, I think initially there was a little bit of like wailing and gnashing of teeth, and kind of feeling like there was some sort of doom and gloom that was surrounding this. And I think over time most people have come to the realization that, I'm not even sure that this portion of the market that the OTC devices are intended to cater to have ever really been served, at least not in a meaningful way. So in my mind, I always kind of think of this as like a secondary market, and I think that actually presents a really awesome. I think almost undeniably presents a bull case that like more people are going to have access to better solutions, and I think there's a virtuous flywheel effect that happens with that, where the better devices, the kind of the cream will rise at the top. There's more incentive to make a better device. And so I think these devices will be good. I'm not sure what that sort of like definitive line of what is self-serve, do it yourself, OTC, and then what's going to be in the medical side of things. And I think the big question that I have is, what is the role of the professional for these what would be perceived to be kind of like not full blown medical grade devices that the consumer though might still have an interest in, some kind of premium service, the demand for audiological care more or less. And I think that's a kind of a big toss up of like, what is that going to look like, and what, so like, how do you make money off that, and how do you fit this into your day to day?
Well, and I think that's a really huge issue right now. Is where do we fit in? I think there, once you get to a certain level of hearing loss, and most the vast majority of people who come into a hearing care office have determined that, gee, I've got some sort of problem. They're not there to waste your time or to drop, a couple $1,000s just for nothing. It's they view it as we talked about it. It's a medical problem. It is a medical problem. It's a medical condition, chronic hearing loss, and but we definitely need we definitely need that bridge to get people into that system. And to your point, Dave, how professional care can insert itself into that process and become an integral part of bringing these people along. I think that's the big challenge for hearing healthcare right now. Being that intermediary, being that authority, being that coach for getting people through that process is really important, and getting them onto the, we're always talking about how, technology is like 1/3 of what the value of a hearing aid is, and the service is 2/3, and why we should have best practices and all of that, right? But when we're talking about this kind of nascent population of professionals, that will be seen by professionals, we have to have different care models for that. Obviously, you have to make money you have to charge money for your time, and so I think that's where the big challenge for audiology is right now.
Yeah, because I think that, if you look at the sort of the status quo and the traditional way in which, you as a provider, the revenue generation opportunity tends to be around device sales. But in OTC world, with this nascent market like you just described, the question is like, well, if you sort of completely remove a lot of the margin and the opportunity on the device sales side, that then basically begs the question of like, does this then mean you provide a service care package? And this is what I think will really emerge and materialize over the next few years. Is I think it's going to be, chances are it will probably go one of like two or three different ways. Like, one is the market ultimately determines that there's not a role for the professional within this market. It's truly do it yourself. And there is a well-defined line of when people constitute the care of a professional. I think the next alternative would be that there is some sort of role, And I think that it's a matter then of how do you commercialize that and how do you effectively implement and integrate that into your practice. So it could be that these are 30-minute consultations that are much more around where you are at within your overall like health profile from a your audiological status, and making them aware of here are tips and here's strategies to cope with whatever loss that you currently have, how to preserve it. So it's that consultative type thing. And I think that like if that's the case, which I personally believe that will ultimately win out. I think it will take time for this to manifest and for professionals to figure out within a 40-hour work week, how do you triage these kinds of people? How do you schedule them? I think that's where a lot of the work's going to be done, is working out those kind of details. But I
Right.
do think that it's ultimately going to come down to the consumer. And I think that the industry and the professionals have, I think, a real opportunity here to present themselves as a premium offering, if you will, within this space. Because I think most consumers are going to look at this and let's call a spade a spade. Like we know that the self-fitting software and algorithms, they're already pretty good and they're probably going to get increasingly better. And so a lot of this is self-serve. And I think that it's like, will there still be a demand from people to say, I still want some type of hand holding, or I want to go through an expert for this? And that's for me, it's a gray area, but you can see how this is going to kind of take shape. At least that's the way I'm thinking of it.
And I mean, you've talked a lot about the the war, what is it, the war dividends of the cell phone
The
wars.
peace dividends of the smartphone wars.
Thank you. But I totally believe that. I mean, um, these are the gains that we're seeing from all of this, this kind of technology that's all kind of siloed and all come together in our cell phones, and it's getting better and better. The one big component to that is telecare, and how telecare is integrated into hearing healthcare offices and practices and networks. I think is going to be crucial for whether or not we're players in that. That the professionals are players in that, if it makes sense for them to be players in that. I mean, you've
Mm-hmm.
talked about this too. I mean, hearables, if you look at the Apple iPod Pros and some of that, they're they're pretty impressive. And up until a certain hearing loss, in my belief anyway, they're some of you can easily see some of that stuff being very helpful. And they don't they don't have to build themselves as being necessarily for hearing loss. They're helpful hearing features, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so that begs another question of where things are going. But to get back to that point, I mean, there at some point people are going to struggle with different situations, the workplace or or family gatherings and that kind of thing. And their hearing, in my opinion, is going to deteriorate to a point where they just have to get professional care. They won't be able to do any, they won't be able to treat it through a hearable or what we view as even what will be an OTC hearing device. I don't, for those types of losses, again, to the previous point, once you get to that more severe level, you've got a medical problem.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, you've got a nascent medical problem, right?
Right.
And how much interplay between the professional and those people are in those milder losses, I think is a real good question. My personal opinion is that professionals should be interjecting whenever they can, whenever it makes sense, and to pay for your, to have people pay for your services.
Yeah, I mean, I think about like, we've seen that pyramid before, the adoption pyramid, where you see, up at the top triangle, you have the highest levels of severity, profound hearing loss, severe hearing loss, and you have a high adoption rate along with that, because obviously it's a more severe medical issue that you're going to seek treatment. And then you go one tier down and it's like 50-50. And then you go down and it's according to the data, it suggests that like 90% of the people that fall in that mild threshold, about 10% of them are seeing professional, or they're being fit with hearing aids. And again, that comes back to this point of like, I don't think that we're really even as an industry servicing these people to begin with. And that's why I do think these are kind of two separate
Right.
markets. And so we have years and decades of how you go ahead and you treat the people that have the medical, moderate and upward levels of severity, like who constitutes a hearing aid patient today.
Right.
And what I think we don't have clearly defined is these people that they might not even be ready for a hearing aid. And so now you have all these new alternative devices that are coming out. I had Jeff Cooling on this 100th episode, and he said something that really stood out to me, which is like, Apple isn't going to be looking, the way that they're thinking about this, and their framing is not, we're going to go after the hearing aid market. I don't think that there's probably any internal discussions that are being had like that. I think rather what they're saying is we want to serve the AirPod population with more advanced features. So they're
Right.
just looking at their own user set, and they're probably thinking, well, if hearing healthcare features and augmentations and sound enhancements are something that our consumer base is responding positively for, we're going to continue to build things for them. And so I think that's how we need to be thinking about this, is that these consumer technology products and these companies that reside behind them are looking at this, I think, more around, I don't know if their calculus is like, how do we solve hearing loss? I think it's more of how do we continually cater to our existing customer base and increasingly up the ante of sophistication of features. And
Mhm.
some of those features very well could be hearing health augmentation type things that, their motivation though isn't really like, I think in our eyes, we see everything through this proxy of like, it's all about solving hearing loss and treating hearing loss. And for them, that's not really what it is.
You're absolutely right. I mean, what they want to do is sell their widgets,
Right.
and it has to do with if it goes slightly, it enters into our realm. They don't care that they're selling widgets.
Right.
Oh,
Exactly.
yeah, but some of them are I mean, I'm always monitoring, what's coming out, and I saw Samsung just came out with a new one, but a lot of them have the two microphones on two external microphones
Yep.
and an internal microphone, and they're talking about transparency modes and ANC, automatic noise cancellation, and all of that stuff. And it's whatever sells, but it certainly goes into our realm, and
Yeah.
it can be applicable for people who have mild hearing loss. Well, good for them, right?
Right. I mean, in many ways, these are building blocks. Like, I think a lot of what Apple's building are, you could see these as being foundational building blocks of what developers might ultimately build. I mean, if they kind of like start to open these things up, and they're already doing that, like the inertial sensors within the AirPods are now kind of like, third parties can access that. That's how the now defunct Nupal, what they were doing was they were tapping into the accelerometer data. And it was actually an amazing use case, because wherever you were looking, it was doing like beamforming. And so it was doing like a directional microphone kind of thing.
And that's
So
carrying over to some of the new technology that we're seeing now, right?
exactly. And so I think like you got Apple, you got Samsung, like all of these consumer technology companies, trust me, they're not looking at this and saying, how do we compete with Sonova?
Right.
They're saying, how do
Right.
we compete with each other
Right.
and maintain our dominance in our market share there? And it just so happens that the battlefield might just kind of bleed on over into our peripheral industry over here, which I think is a huge net positive,
Right.
because the way I see everything right now in terms of how do you increase adoption? Well, one of the ways that you can increase adoption is making people aware of these features in the first place. I think that like one of the most telling pieces of data that I've ever come across that really sticks out in my mind is like hearing aid satisfaction rates are actually pretty high, but penetration rates have historically been plagued in like just mired in like 30% land.
Right.
And so it's like people like these things, but yet we can't get anybody to really seemingly wear them.
But then again, I don't mean to interrupt, but
Yeah.
Brent Edwards did an article for us many, probably 10 or 15 years ago, and Brent's with NAL, uh, but he pointed out that what you're talking about with that triangle, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
You've got all those people down there, but they're not really hearing aid customers.
Right.
And it goes again to what we were talking about. That's not our market. It wasn't our market.
Right.
We've certainly companies within hearing healthcare have taken aim or tilted at the windmill of that market, and I'll just say it, they failed miserably because our distribution model basically isn't set up for it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a medical distribution model that's trying to appeal to a consumer set.
Right. So again, going all the way back to to the beginning of our conversation, it's not our market. They're two separate markets, um, and however we can interject and get people from that market educated and moving toward a professional hearing care model when they get there, when they need it, the better off we're all going to be, the better off they're going to be.
Yeah, I think that like the best way to kind of tie a bow on this whole thing is exactly like you said there, which is the question isn't like, will OTC be a thing? Will it be viable? Like the consumers will ultimately answer that question. The market will respond to that. And it might not have anything to do with like it's not really in the control of the hearing industry and the
Right.
professionals. However, the big thing that I think continues to be up for grabs is what will that role look like if we are going to interject ourselves? And I think there's going to have to be a massive rethink because you can't fit a square peg in a round hole and just say, well, we have this medical model of access and distribution. You got to come and see a provider, in a sense, they're a gatekeeper. It very well might have to be something that is very much online, remote care, these things that we just have to think differently in terms of what's going to appeal to the customer. Will it be convenience is king? And so don't you dare suggest that you need to bring people into a clinic because that's going to be a huge detractor and a non-starter. And will it be something that is more like almost like an Uber, but for hearing care, just on-demand thing, like next person available, I want to speak to an expert.
Or might something develop where we have a common programming platform similar to like a high pro type of thing for over the counter and hearables
Totally.
that somebody could tune into. And given that, might there be and I'm just speculating, but might there be a technician in literally a hearing aid technician or wouldn't even be called that in your back office who handles those types of things for a fee?
I mean, exactly. I think just look at the way that business is conducted now. You see it in all different walks of life. Like, just look at the way that the pandemic just kind of altered people's minds in terms of delivering groceries and food. And so you have like mom and pop restaurants now that have to have it, they were really tasked with like, you have to come up with a way that's conducive to the new habits of the buyer. And so you got to create a solid pickup system. And maybe you got to use these like DoorDash and Grubhub and these different things. And so I think that like we're probably not going to be immune to the same sorts of changes within this industry, which could be a big net positive. I mean, it really could be that for this secondary market, and I think it's important to just continually emphasize this is a new market. What are you going to have to do to interject yourself? And are you willing to do that? Like
Right.
a lot of people might look at it and say, no.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, well, Karl, thank you so much. I think this has been really great. I always appreciate your insight. You've been covering this industry for a long time, and it's really cool to hear, your perspective kind of start to shift a little bit from just looking at it from an industry standpoint, which obviously always had consumer undertones, but to now really see you focusing on that with Hearing Tracker. And just a total shout out to the whole team, because you guys are doing amazing work. It feels like you just continually increase the quality of the stuff that you guys are producing, from the videos to the writing the content and all that. So good on you. It's really cool to see.
Great. Thank you for having me, Dave. And I appreciate all that you do for the industry.
Cheers.